everybody. Welcome once again to the Road to the ProcureTech Cup, the show that's all about showing you, procurement professionals, the art of the possible with procurement technology. Really happy to have you on the show today. It's episode 24 of the season. We've got one more to go, and then we're doing our huge end of April, end of season conference. So very excited to be near wrapping up the season here. We've got Pactum AI on the show today. Who's going to show us and discuss how to build deployment plans for specialized solutions. So we'll get into defining what that means together, but very excited to have Pactum on the show. And they're also on the show next week. So if you're wanting to learn more about Pactum and about best practices to deploy solutions like Pactum and other specialized solutions, these are the two shows for you. So before we get to our guest here, let me just do a bit of housekeeping. So I just mentioned it, right? April 22nd to 24th, we've got our first inaugural conference, 100% virtual. I just posted on LinkedIn this morning about it. I think we've got 5 tickets left, right? So we were sold out. We met the objective that I had, and I just said let's rejig stuff. Like if people want to come, it's a virtual event, so we can expand it. And we're able to get a few more moderators for breakout groups, that sort of thing. So I'll flash a QR code in a second here. And if you want to come, do not hesitate to apply for a spot. Deployment strategies today. Last show next week around change management and governance with Pactum as well for specialized solutions. And then the conference. So very excited. In the conference, peer-led breakout sessions. So I'm making sure everybody who's coming owns a digital roadmap. We'll speak to peers that own digital roadmaps in your industry, whether that's SaaS, whether you're banking, financial services, manufacturing, pharma. We've got breakout groups around all of those different types of industries. We've got solution demos from our sponsored vendors that have been on the show all year. Workshops, keynotes. You're going to vote for the ProcureTech Cup winners this year as well. So we're in the last stretch here of planning. I'm really excited. So if you would like a spot, I know it's coming up fast in 2 weeks, right? So it's the last kind of time that people can still plan their calendars out for those 3 half days. Scan the QR code, fill out the survey. I will get back to you. And it's on a first come, first serve basis for those last little tickets that are available. And then right before I bring my guest on, just a little agenda here. So we'll discuss, as I mentioned, what is a specialized solution? How to define that in the ProcureTech market map that we show every week. And then we'll go into deployment planning, right? Why is it important? What does a good deployment plan look like? We'll define it with you, right? What do we mean by deployment planning? And then when and where do we start with deployment planning? And then we'll wrap things up by the end of the half hour here. So hopefully we'll have a really good show. So on that note, Marshall from Pactum, account director, thanks so much for coming to meet us today.
Hi, Joel. Good morning. Thanks for having me. Big hello to everyone watching. By the way, this is my very first podcast, so no pressure.
Yeah. You were telling me that offline. That's great. I'm honored to be your first, and so I'm sure we'll have lots of fun as we go through the conversation here. Indeed. So let me just bring the slide up. I think you were mentioning you're out of London, so I want to thank you first and foremost for being at the end of your day with us here. Appreciate it. So what is a specialized solution? You see this market map every week, right? But essentially, the way I define it, and then I'll ask you, Marshall, what your perspective is, right? Is something that is going to give you a capability that you may or may not get in a specific domain-specific solution, like a sourcing solution or a contract management solution, right? So it can either be something that's subdomain, so like just renewals, right? Focused on renewals of a specific category within sourcing, or a very wide, very thin capability that sits across the entire procurement cycle. And so it's something that's doing, a very specific high value activity for you, or giving you a high value capability so that you can unlock things that you may not be able to unlock with a best of breed solution and or a wider platform or suite. So that's how I think about it. Marshall, what would you add to that definition?
No, I completely echo that, Joel. I've always sort of broadly seen sort of specialized solutions in procurement in 2 buckets, right? The first, like you said, it's specialized to a specific procurement category. So for instance, an autonomous sourcing tool for sourcing, right? But then there's the other bucket that is more like a specialized capability that sits across. It's sort of sector agnostic. It sits in some or most of these categories, be it sourcing, contracts, operational procurement, and driving value really in some shape or form. I think it's quite important to differentiate these when we define sort of specialized solutions.
Yeah, and I would to your two categories and maybe add a third, which is like a spend category specific
Mhm.
solution, right? I always think about like service procurement tools that sit on top of or adjacent to an end-to-end procurement suite as well, right? Do you see those as specialized solutions?
Yeah, absolutely right. I think that's equally important, right? But I think what I position Pactum, if I allow me to be sort of position Pactum, is it's that second bucket, right? Which is sort of what do we do at Pactum, right? At Pactum, we deploy AI agents that can identify commercial signal across these sort of procurement function, right? Be it sourcing, be it contracts, price lists, operational procurement, and then start executing on these commercial opportunities. Through autonomous negotiations at scale. So that's certainly the specialized solution that I would define Pactum in.
Cool. Yeah, so let's dive deeper into that second category.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think before that, I think what makes sort of Pactum unique and specialized, well, and special is that our USP is around that sort of autonomous execution layer. I think, Joel, you and me were talking about this, that I think generally in the procurement fraternity, there's a sense that we've perfected the art of generating insight, right? Be it identifying opportunities, analyzing spend, sort of guiding you in the right direction, telling you where the value is. I don't think insight's ever been the problem in procurement. I think it's really been that ability to scale the execution on those insight and opportunities, right? And if I sort of think about it, intent has never been the concern over here. It's always been that capacity constraint. And that's where sort of Pactum's coming in, fitting in. We're deploying AI agents to sort of augment that limited sort of human capacity and actually start executing on all those opportunities at scale. And I think even more so over the past, I think year or so, we're almost, I'd argue, we're redefining the whole procurement model for operational procurement, right? Where we believe it's a strong bond between sort of humans and agents, where humans are guiding the strategy and sort of agents are handling all that execution at scale. I think we try to say that it's procurement run with agents and not by agents.
Hmm.
So if you just look at the Pactum execution engine, as and when even there's a simple request, right, my agents are capable of taking that request, right, aligning it against commercial policies, understanding commercial readiness, identifying what the opportunity is. Is there an opportunity to drive commercial value from it? Can I prepare the arguments for that opportunity and then even actually go out to the suppliers and execute at scale? So I think that's where sort of Pactum is truly making a difference to the procurement tech space, and that's where we're specialized. And if you just go to the next slide, I think we're doing this with a few agents. We're calling it your augmented AI team. And like I said in the previous slide, we're not just limited to one procurement category, be it, engaging on commercial terms with your suppliers, or be it on a very simple spot request that's coming and needs an urgent, requirement, be it sourcing events, or even in the world where today where there's a lot of volatility and chaos and oil prices are going crazy, can we equip our buyers, our category managers with that intelligence just to be ahead of the game, just to ensure that no one's cheating you, avoid costs? I think there's all these layers of execution that were constrained by capacity, which can really be fulfilled and alleviated by AI agents for execution.
Yeah, and I think we discussed that example a bit further offline, right, around the oil prices. Like if you have a strategy from a commodities perspective or a category perspective, right, but
Yeah,
the oil prices are swinging left and right, like that little arrow in the previous slide that goes around like the cycle, right, is you want to be able to execute on your strategy and change how you react to it operationally on
yeah,
a day-to-day basis, right? Based on those market swings for certain commodity prices. And the way you explained it, I go, okay, so if I'm using Pactum to execute on that at scale, but continuously over time as well, right?
correct. The previous version of that slide was the linear sort of line, which is sort of box A to box B. We've changed that to this circular, never-ending engine because that's what's needed today, right? A procurement's ever evolving. There's ever-changing impacts to your procurement, so that engine should never stop, right? The agent should constantly be able to align, identify opportunities, prepare, and execute.
Yeah. And so it's, to further piggyback on that example, if the prices swing over X, execute X campaign. If it goes back down over X, execute X thing again, right? And do it autonomously based on those triggers, based on our strategy and tactics that we've developed for that specific spend category.
100%. And again, just double downing for me, execution is the key, right? I think the analogy I use, and given I fly so much, I use aviation quite a bit. I think the way I put it is sort of most tools, right, are like air traffic control, right? They can see all the aircrafts, they can manage the flow, direct who should land, who should take off, etc. Pactum is the pilot, right? We actually land the plane, right? And that's what differentiates us from the tech space.
I like that. I like that. All right, cool. So I think it gives us a flavor of what specialized solutions can be. Of course, there's multiple different actors, and they can sort of be like, this is kind of the all-purpose category, right? In the sense where it could be something completely different, but I think we wanted to give you a flavor with what Pactum does and how it would fit into an existing tech stack, right? And I think that's something we'll get into as we look at deployment planning. Is these specialized solutions typically, some can stand alone, but others might bolt on to existing tech that you already have, right? And so that comes and influences how you want to think about deployment plans, which is how do we actually roll this technology out to
Yeah.
get to the final outcome that we're looking for in terms of, in this case, having all of those agents connected to our strategy categories, and or our sourcing event, and or our negotiations, and or our purchase recs spot buys coming in, and executing on the strategies and the business rules that we have. So yeah, I'd throw the ball back over to you, Marshall, around like, we had three things in the agenda around like what is the relevance of deployment planning, and what makes it different in specialized solutions.
Yeah, it's kind of like Pactum, right? You've guided me the strategy and the theme, and I've executed on the content, right? but, but yeah, I know. I think deployment planning is not just sort of relevant, but very important, right? Today, especially with the advent of specialized solutions, Joel, right? I think I've been in procurement, sort of the procurement space in tech for a while now, and time and again, I've seen so this thing that procurement teams are really good at evaluating features, right? But where they lack, to be politically correct, is on the deployment. I know we were discussing this in other sort of aviation analogies, that procurement spends 80% on evaluating the cockpit, right? What's inside, how beautiful it is, and really just 20% on how do we really land this thing, right? And I think that's a big nuance that one needs to double down on. And
Yeah, because the plane is already in flight when you buy it, right? Like you need to land. You need to land. No, I love that analogy, right? And I couldn't agree more, because and it's a lot of what we do at the Peer Procurement newsletter around how do we get procurement more IT knowledge, and how do we give IT more procurement knowledge so that we can be at the intersection of things like deployment planning, right? To
correct.
get to value at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think a lot of it sort of ties back to just our standard way of working over the last couple of decades, right? And if I just take these big enterprise tools, right, the Coopers and the SAPs, I think they always came with a safety net, right? When it came to deployment, right, there was always either a big SI in the ecosystem, or
Mhm.
there were pre-built methodology decks. There were armies of consultants who've done this hundreds of times, right? I've seen it, right? Even if you underplanned it, you still landed the aircraft. The infrastructure catches you. I think with specialized tools, the requirements are slightly more nuanced. So there's some complexity. It's different muscle, right? I can speak for Pactum, right? The expectation is time to value, implement as soon as possible, right? Our implementations are done in-house, right? These are all new methodologies. It can vary from one customer to the other. None of my customers have done this kind of specialized solution before. So I think under planning can have sort of consequences for specialized solutions. And I don't think the gap is capability, right?
Mhm.
It's the mindset. I think, I think specialized solutions fail because customers generally treat it as an afterthought, and actually vendors let them, right? And
Yeah.
I'll be honest, at Pactum, we've been around for 6 years. We've learned the hard way, right? Luckily, we learned it early on. So I think we've come to a point now where I can very boldly say that I think we figured it out, right?
Yeah, and we'll get to some proof points of that in the next couple of slides. But I love your point around the SI, right? Where more and more of the trend I'm seeing, even with newer platform vendors, is like, no, there's no SI needed, right? Like we'll do it with you. Yes, you can bring an SI in, right? There are special roles, like you still need to do change management and all this. If you need additional capabilities, you can certainly go get an SI, but it's not mandatory as it used to be.
Yeah.
And especially if you're getting into smaller scope type solutions, right? And so I find it just reiterates the importance of procurement developing IT skills and IT developing procurement skills, and really working together internally when you deploy with a vendor these types of solutions, and then also partnering with vendors that don't just have the technology down, but have the way to land the plane down as well, right? In terms of not just the what they'll give you in terms of capabilities, which we've been referring to with Pactum, but in terms of delivering on the project.
Correct, 100% right. So I think with that, with great powers comes great responsibilities. So I've tried to summarize, if you can come, my 5-point plan of what makes a good deployment. Some references to Pactum along the way, and I see these a lot. Right? I think the first very important thing is the ability to do flexibility by design. Right. I think even with Pactum, one big misconception I see often is that procurement teams think they need like this full integration, right, before going live. And I've seen that can kill the momentum. The reality is that sometimes with our specialized solution, speed is more important than perfection, right? Start manual, prove the value in a few weeks, and add the integration when that sort of internal buy-in kicks in, right? That's important to highlight. I think the other thing is that, at Pactum, we work with very large organizations, right? We're working with 51 of the Global 2000, and these are complex procurement systems with multiple ERPs, and there's no one clean single system anymore, right? And the ability to be able to be flexible around these different workflows, different regions, it's no more a nice to have, right? I think it's almost essential.
Well, multi ERP, and then different configurations within those ERPs, even if they're the same ones, right? And or source to pay suites or intake and orchestration platforms, etc. Like there's an explosion of tech, and so there's an explosion of different setups within those business. Absolutely. And I love, like I've talked about this on other episodes around the minimum viable scope, right? And I think your first point touches on that, which is like, what is the smallest thing we could do with the least amount of users possible that would generate some value, but also demonstrate the concept works in our ecosystem, right? In our context. And then we can keep growing it from there and get to the hockey stick type benefits, right?
Correct. And I'll jump onto that one. Just to be clear to the audience, please don't confuse minimum viable scope with a pilot, right?
Yeah.
It's not my favorite word. I think irrespective of, in your specialized solution, if it's a pilot or if it's a full rollout or production, whatever you may call it, I think just sharing a Pactum experience again, there's always that temptation to go after that biggest, most complex category first, because that's where the value is. But in reality, that's always the hardest place to start, right? I think what we do very diligently at Pactum is we try and guide the customers with this sort of MVP. So for instance, a category where the spec is clear, right? Or where there's enough supplier competition, we're talking in the context of negotiations, right? Or where you can move quickly, right? Our view is, start there, run it, prove it, show the numbers, build the internal confidence, and then, the world is your oyster, right? I've always said, you can't try and win the whole sort of game in one day, right? So I think that's where minimum viable product, to your point, Joel, becomes very important as well. Yeah, I mean, gates, I think this is, very important. I think our traditional mindset generally, goes towards that sort of timeline-based mentality, right? What's the project plan? What's week 1? What's week 2? What's week 3, right? But in reality, timelines don't really guarantee success. I think gates do, right? And a gate can be something as simple as asking, are we actually ready to move forward, right?
Yeah. You don't start testing until the build's done, right? Like little things like that, right? And like, I always tell clients as well, like nobody's going to remember that you deployed 2 weeks later than you initially planned or thought or aimed at, right? What they're going to remember is whether it was a success or not, right? And so having a bit more flex in your project plan and in your timeline is often the best way to go, right? Because you'll set yourself up for success instead of setting yourself up for go live on a specific date, right? And with specialized solutions, I feel like this is more possible because it's not a structural like ERP type migration, like flip the switch off, flip the switch on, and like operations need to switch. So considering that in your deployment planning can be, and then just project planning in general can be an asset for sure.
100%. I was smiling because I used the exact same phrase, Joel, right? Nobody remembers the 2-week delay, but everyone remembers the failed deployment. But yeah, I think that it reemphasizes the importance of gate, right? Simple questions, I address in deployment is the data clean, right? The data is not clean, right? And I've always said this, right? Any AI solution, no matter how good or how bad, will be a failure if the data is not good, right? So that's the gate, right? Do we
Unless
have?
it's an AI data cleansing solution.
You'll be surprised. Or are the supplier contacts correct in a
Yeah.
Pactum, assessment? If I don't have the right supplier contact, I can't negotiate, right? Have the buyers been briefed? And I think uh, you can't skip these. These are important for a successful deployment, right? Which brings me to stakeholder management. Sounds very basic, right? But I think it's actually one of the most common reasons why I think things can stall, right? I think with Pactum, there's always sort of two critical ownership questions I would ask: who owns the data, right? And who owns supplier communication, right? If you leave these questions for later, it can be a nightmare. It's been a nightmare, right? I think it's very important to clear things like these upfront, do that sort of stakeholder mapping, ensure you've got your ducks in a row so that there's this level of consistency that goes through when you go live post deployment, right? And of course, then the last I'd say is change management. Uh, I think I come from again, enterprise suite sort of mindset. Change management has always been buyer centric, but that narrative changes with specialized solutions, especially Pactum, right? I think it's equally important to get the buyers comfortable, but also sort of get the suppliers comfortable. And it's not a one-sided system, right? I think if we can do that, we generally see more supplier participation in negotiations, better engagement, and ultimately better results. So
Yeah.
so I think just to summarize, I think these are my 5-point plan for a good deployment, right? Hopefully it fits in your sort of specialized solution bandwidth as well. Uh, Deployment can be very straightforward if you get your ducks in a row, but if you miss any one of these, I think it can show very quickly.
Yeah, and it adds complexity, right? I always think about like how, especially in the early stages, how do I limit the number of variables that could come and change the dynamic of the project as we're trying to roll it out? I want to keep that deployment window like as small as possible from design, build, test, deploy, and then I can always do it again, right? But I want to keep those windows small so that I limit the amount of variability that can happen and people going off in different directions with different ideas and
Yeah.
different scopes. But I love those last 2 points, right? And we might touch on it next week on governance, but like the data point, I often get into situations where we'll need a certain piece of data or data object and a certain quality to be able to execute correctly on the deployment of a tool or get to the business outcomes. But there's no owner, right? Like it's just been I don't know, it's a free for all data object in the system, right? And so it's like it's about potentially defining that ownership and defining that governance structure operationally for after the project, like as part of like that'll increase your scope,
Yeah.
but it's something that'll be critical to you being able to get to the outcomes that you want.
Yeah, and I just we've done this so many times at Pactum, and we've reached the conclusion that it's not rocket science. It just needs structure and process, right? And if you get that in place, then I think it becomes quite seamless. And just to cover on the third topic, which is when's a good time. I think this is one thing that we've organically at Pactum sort of figured out as a very important best practice. I think for us, deployment doesn't start after going live, right? Deployment starts uh, before going live, right? I think for every uh, account we work on, right? The beauty of Pactum is you see the teams come together, whether it's the sales guys and the solution consulting guys and the product guys, and we come together and we sit and align with all our prospects on the essentials to ensure that there are absolutely no blind spots up front when we go live, right? And it's the straightforward stuff, but it's just the job that needs to be done, right? So something as simple as defining success criteria, right? I think with enterprise suite solutions, it's one of three options, right? With specialized solutions, every organization can have different success criterias, right? What does good look like? What are the KPIs that we need to agree on? Who's the owner? I think it's imperative to have these conversations up front. Tying back to my sort of MVP conversation, right? Uh, have that conversation upfront, right? What's that category? What's the spend scope that should go into phase one, right? Let's take your data, right? Let's discuss it. Let's filter it by data readiness. Let's filter it by supplier pool size, transaction volume. Don't stress about the biggest category, right? Let's identify the right one. I think that's very important. I think accountability matrix. Um, I think at Pactum, we've got documentation around how we try and align and map tasks before going live. So what will Pactum do? What will the customer do? There's no gray area, right? Who owns the data? Who owns supplier comms? who's signing off on outcomes, right? I think this becomes equally important as well. Not sure if you want to add something on that, Joel.
No, I'm just thinking back to the earlier point we discussed around the lack of a necessary SI, right, or system integrator. And so to me, like, just especially in a specialized solution context where I might be bolting on to an existing source to pay suite or ERP system, right, my expectation as a buyer should be like much higher in terms of proof points for that specialized solution vendor to around their deployment planning and their deployment execution chops, right? So, do I have templated materials? Like, what's the method to the madness, right? What are the phases? What are the activities? Coming to the table with those pre-templated assets, if I can put it that way. And yes, that of course adapting them to the context, but to be like those are the types of things I'm going to want to see before I commit to deploying one of these specialized solutions. I don't know if that, is that fair?
No, it's absolutely fair, right? I think you're making the right points. I think it's also important to mention that this is not a queue. It's not a interview session, right? It's a collaborative session.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So if I look at data readiness assessment as well, of course, like I've said before, for any AI, data is important, right? We do the supplier master quality checks, right? But if there is an issue with the data, right, should we set the remediation plan? Right, let's figure that out before, right? Let's not wait to, let's start and then we'll figure it out, right? Let's not keep any surprises mid deployment. So I think it's important that these sessions are not us in a room, right? Switch on the mic, you give me the answers to my question, but let's collaborate, right? We're on the same team, and what can we do to make this happen, right? I think that's important. Integration path. I think I wrote this very selfishly because I just wanted to highlight the point that, one of the beauties of Pactum is that we can integrate with the Coopers and Aribas in hours, not days, right? The whole game is changing, right? What previously used to be 18-month deployments is now 2 hours, right? So I think that's important as well. If there's an integration, if that's required, what's the system? What's the environment? Who owns the ID? What's the sandbox UAT production sequence? Like, all that information becomes important, right? And equally, and probably I'll end with this, is for Pactum, we negotiate, right? What we want to do is we want to ensure that the customer knows what we're negotiating for them, right? So to the extent possible, we even try and align on things like, what levers are we going to go live with on day one, right? Is it price? Is it payment terms? Is it discounts? Like, let's agree on this. Let's document it, so that we don't have to discover anything new or see any blind spots.
Even to the point of having, at least in the Pactum contest, like the list of acceptable payment terms / discount combinations, or other commercial terms that you're willing to negotiate on in an autonomous manner.
Correct. I mean, negotiations is always going to be the core procurement's KPI, right? And as a procurement person, I'm always looking for levers, right? There's a big balance between how complex can I make it, but how can I also standardize it and keep it fair across my supplier base, right? And I guess that's the conversation we want to have with you upfront, right? And that's alignment on sort of commercial terms. But yeah, these are just best practices. There's no one right answer over here, Joel. It's to take the time to share with everyone that, we just try to ensure there's no surprises for us and the customer, so that when we start, we're just always setting it up for success.
And I love that, right? And the collaboration aspect that you mentioned, I didn't want to make it seem like that's not what I was recommending, but it's more getting to the point where you understand as a client, right? And we talked about like partnering with IT as procurement as well, and like bringing IT into the conversation will help build that trust a lot faster, I think. Even if you're not connecting to any other systems, right? Like in that minimum viable scope, but looking at it that way and making sure that you understand all the details is probably the best way to get to success. Very cool. Well, thanks so much, Marshall, for taking the time. I know we're coming up on time here for the show. So to everybody watching, thank you for coming on. If you want to follow the Peer Procurement newsletter, we talk about best practices around all this types of stuff, all the different solution categories on a weekly basis, and also send the invites out to the show weekly. And I know, Marshall, you and the folks at Pactum prepared a little something for the audience as well, right?
Yeah, there's a, Pactum's such a cool solution that in many folks' heads, it's always a concept, right? My favorite part about Pactum is bringing that concept to a reality. There's a small snippet of that in a 90-second video. So if you'd like to learn more about Pactum, just scan that QR code there, see what we do, right? If it intrigues you, of course, you know where to find us.
Yeah, very cool. And I think it's like with specialized solutions, the scope is so wide that it's always easier to, as you say, right, see the concept become reality. And if you guys are able to do that in a minute and a half, that's amazing.
Very
So
proud.
yeah, so Marshall, thanks so much for everybody that's tuning in, whether from Montreal, Sao Paulo, Vancouver, as I saw you in the chat. Thanks so much for being here. Last show of the season next week. And we will then have the conference at the end of April, which we're very excited for. So Marshall, thank you again for tuning in.
Thank
We'll see
you.
you again next week, guys.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.